Hey crew, Mike McGoldrick here. In this episode of the Corpus Animus podcast, myself, Maxwell Hodge, and Brandon Dorman are going to talk about movement.
If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. Learn more about the art and science of program design for CrossFit in our online educational platform, The Classroom. Get a free 7-day trial at trainingthinktank.com/classroom trial.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
It was awesome. All right, what are we talking about today?
You're in charge, man. You tell me what
we're talking about. Movement. Pretty interesting topic from the training think tank side. I think that we have a bit of a history on defining this and building content behind it. So I think this show will be really fun to kind of dive into what we define it as and how we apply it to training and why it's different than, like a normal definition, or why it's important, really.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a different definition. Like, movement's pretty straightforward. Like, you're sitting still, your body moves, it's meant to move, and that's part of the process of just living life. Being still, moving. Actually applying a training model to changing the way that you move or the way that you operate in a training environment, I think is what I have come to call movement training. And it started with being influenced by people like Ido Portal that talked about movement as this esoteric concept. So I went through the normal process of like sport, getting injured, getting into CrossFit, and thinking about movement in terms of performance output. Like, good movement is like, if I can clean 380 pounds, then I'm a good mover. That's all I need to do. And then you go through a process of realizing like, okay, well, in order to do that, I need to change my technique. I need to change the way that I operate. My body's not allowing me to go in these positions. How do I change that? And going through experts like that and then finding the information that led them to their perspective, I think was like, oh, we need a model or some sort of progressive way to train people to change movement the same way that we have for strength work and energy system work. And that was really the whole concept of trying to build a movement course, build movement training protocols, was basically telling people like, yeah, cool, this is how your body moves and this is what you want to accomplish. Here are tools and a training model that you can use to get yourself to that point of actually changing the way that your body moves around in space and accomplishes the task.
It's funny to think about it that way, because I think a lot of people, especially in CrossFit, don't really think about moving well or moving until they're in a lot of pain, right? Like, that's the challenge that we always run into. I've done it myself, so like, I'm not gonna be a hypocrite and say I have.
What are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm having knee surgery today from an old injury, actually from football, that's kind of caused issues and everything else that kind of goes with doing a high volume sport like CrossFit. But we always think of it as like, I gotta go harder, I gotta go faster, I need to build my capacity, but we're not thinking about it in a way like, how can I move better so that I have all the skills of the sport that are like in my toolbox, but then also that I have better movement economy, and we can dive into that a little bit later. But I think the thing that happens for most people, what happened for me and where I really bought into kind of the concepts that you're talking about, I was in pain. And I'm like, how do I get out of this? Because everything that I do, I go home and it's like my knee's swollen, my shoulder's hurting, or whatever it may be. And then I started thinking about it a little bit more critically, whereas otherwise I was just like, I just need to go hard in a workout.
Yeah, I mean, I was the same thing. Like, pain was the catalyst for me to get to that point. And it was like getting injured, and my process for getting through pain at that point was like this young toughness model, where it's like, okay, my shoulder hurts, but it's not gonna stop me from doing what I wanna do, so I'm gonna keep going. And then it's like, all right, well, now you need shoulder surgery because you have no labrum and you have no bicep tendon, and you have this thing happen, and you get your surgery and you get back to it, and then it's like constantly sore and it doesn't feel good, and you can't get into the positions that you want to get in, you can't do the things that you want to do, you can't be tough through the pain. And then you're like, all right, well, this like blunt force, like this is my wall and I'm gonna run through it model is not working, because every time I try to do that, if the wall is hard enough, I'm just breaking every time I run into it. So I started regressing physically. So once that model of like, I'm gonna be tougher, once that stopped working, it was like, all right, well, I need to outthink the problem. I need to figure out a smarter solution. So I do think that it comes from, for me, it came from pain, it came from injury, but for most people, I wish it would happen before that, because you probably avoid more injuries if you thought about it critically beforehand and had good principles of training before you started that. And also, I think like now I'm kind of getting into CrossFit like as as an athlete a second time with a whole different model of how I think about movement, how I think about training in probably a less capable body. I'm less strong than I used to be. I'm less like tough mentally, but I'm able to do things at a higher level of fitness probably because I think about movement in a different way. Like if you're trying to speed up your burpee cadence on bar facing burpees and you can analyze your movements and you're like, oh, if I jump over the bar and I rotate 360 degrees in the air and I land on my feet facing the opposite direction, I'm saving half a second a rep, but I'm still only jumping the same amount of distance. And going through an analysis process of movement like that on yourself, I think does allow you to just be a better athlete as well. It's not just like, well, move better for health. It's also like, well, if you do this, it also makes you a better performance athlete.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. I think the difference in the culture, right? Like, so you said you learned a lot through, or you were, I guess, started on the movement journey following some of like Ido Portal's, and that culture and community is very different for why they approach movement training versus the CrossFit world, where it is like, pain is like the catalyst that drives someone to care about improving their movement, and also like improving sport. And I think if you can somehow combine the idea of both of those, that it allows you to be more proactive instead of reactive in the approach of actually being a better mover. You know, because you have like the movement culture where they're doing it more out of like free form and self-expression, like flow-based type stuff. Not necessarily because they're in pain. Some of them might have shifted to that culture because...
And that's might how they started.
Right, you know, but in CrossFit, it's definitely like, okay, what makes me start to care about this? I'm either unable to move faster in a certain movement because I have restrictions, or I'm tired of doing the same movements that cause pain and I can't produce force.
Yeah. I think to like sell the concept, if I were saying like, you know, I know a lot of people, they're very against like, oh man, I got to do B through G of this training session. It takes me an hour and a half.
If you guys haven't seen it, you need to watch the movement course and see what he's talking about.
Yeah, just a lot of different isometric stretching, things that you're not used to doing, being in uncomfortable positions. And I get it. It's frustrating. I actually enjoy doing it, so I guess I'm not in the same headspace when I do it as like, man, this feels like a chore. But I think no matter what, so we get passionate about certain disciplines of training. And for a lot of people, I'm sure everyone watching right now, if they're watching this, it's probably CrossFit. CrossFit for some people might be a lifelong process. Like some people might start CrossFit when they're 20 and stay doing it till they're 60. Most people will probably come into CrossFit, take some things that they like doing it. Maybe they start out as a competitor and then they stop competing, they lower their volume, but they like the powerlifting aspect of CrossFit. They like the gymnastics aspect of CrossFit, but not the kipping because that hurts their shoulders. And they like the conditioning and the for time component, so they start to construct metcons that have much more simple lower loaded contractions so they can keep doing it. Then that becomes part of their fitness process and they add other things to it and they go through this process of evolution about finding what makes sense for them in their body. What I think people need to realize is like, well, you only got one body through your life. So if you think about your movement and what you can do with your body first, and you set that as the foundation, then I think each one of those individual quests is A, it's more meaningful, and B, you can take it as like a stepping stone to where you're going ultimately in building your like legacy as a person and what you've done over the course of your life with your body, versus thinking of it like, I'm a CrossFitter and everything's going to be measured through CrossFitters. So, well, first you're a human, and if you can work on your movement quality both as a human and as a CrossFitter, you probably make both of those things better over time.
I want to go back real quick to something that you said. You said, I don't mind doing the B through G because, I have to guess that part of that is, one, you've kind of trained yourself. So part of this is like, you do have to train yourself to like be okay with doing that kind of work. The other thing though is that you see the benefit that comes with doing that kind of sacrifice of taking the time to go through that. And to kind of go back to like other sports, we talked about golf when we were coming on here, right? Tiger Woods spends all this time on the range perfecting his movement pattern for the sport that he's playing. And it's maybe easier for someone like that, or Tom Brady throwing a football, or Steph Curry shooting a basketball, because that's the one thing that they have to really perfect. And we don't see that in CrossFit because there's so many different things that we're doing, but we do zero in on it on some things, right? So for example, like the snatch or the clean and jerk, everyone's trying to perfect that movement. But then we're not thinking about like, why am I getting knee pain when I do a bunch of thrusters or air squats or box step ups or whatever it is that's causing the issue? So I think we need to take a step back as CrossFitters and say, hey, every other sport's actually doing the same thing. The best in the sport
the
are
attention
fixing,
to detail.
Right, and maybe it's not just the snatch and the clean and jerk, but it's everything, a more holistic approach. And then that's also where it kind of comes back to the last thing that you said, that we then take it like it's not just about the sport, but also health and longevity for life, so that we are living a good life. And like for me right now, I think having 2 kids more and more, that's almost the most important thing. Not just performing and trying to beat you guys or whoever else, but also like going home and like no pain and being able to have fun with my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe segues into like the 5 characteristics of movement that I used to create a model to explain what I mean when I say movement. And it can be applied at a holistic level as just a body or a human, but it'll also be applied to a singular thing. So first would be intensity, is like just simply, I want to get strong at something. I want to be explosive
that was my favorite.
as a human. Mike is intense. Endurance would be second, is just be able to do a lot of volume of a specific skill. No one likes that one. Virtuosity would be the ability to go through your own process of self-discovery. So like if I snatch and Mike snatches, it doesn't look exactly the same. We have different bodies, different limb lengths, different cues, different athletic abilities, different flexibilities. So even though we might have some of the same positions, like we both want to have our first pull, not having our back angle change and getting thrown forward, we both are going to accomplish that task a little bit differently. So like virtuosity is that individual process that happens.
Real quick, even the best in the sport look different.
For sure.
Every sport
In
too.
every,
So just to kind of say that to the people watching.
Variability is being able to do that skill in a variety of different ways. So like, snatch under fatigue, snatch with muscle ups, snatch heavy, snatch light, snatch with your arms a little bit tighter, snatch with your arms a little bit wider. That's super valuable in CrossFit. I'm missing my last one. Intensity, endurance, variability, virtuosity, and somebody help me. And freedom, movement freedom. Thank you.
I had to think
movement
about it.
I literally took my notes before I came. Like, I'm gonna brain fart on camera, which would just basically be the ability to be free, to be able to go into a positions. Generally, the freedoms for some people are pain. Like, I generally have a range to get into a position, but if I get into a position that my body doesn't want to be in, it hurts. I'm like, well, I don't want to be there. It makes me tighten up and move away from it. There are some people that don't have that pain reaction. They're just tense. Like, you have watched somebody squat, I'm like, does that hurt? They're like, no, I just can't go deeper. It's like, well, you're just a stiff ball.
Body doesn't want you to
it's
go
like
deeper.
lacking freedom to get into that position. So that model applied to snatching makes sense, right? Intensity, I want to snatch more. Endurance, I want to be able to snatch 30 for time and do grace really well. Variability, be able to snatch under fatigue with muscle ups. Virtuosity, figure out whatever my own cues, my own approach, my own setup, all of that stuff. Freedom, be able to get my shoulders, knees, ankles, hips into position to be able to do those things pain-free and feel free to do it. That could also just be applied as a human, right? Like as a mover, I want to be strong, enduring, free to move, variable to do things that I want to do, and did I miss freedom again? No, and virtuosity. And understand virtuosity, understand what I want to do with my body. Like, I don't think of movement like, hey, move like me, roll around, kick heavy bags, punch bags, swing around on rings, roll on the floor, do plyometrics, do CrossFit, play golf. Like, that's not a model that I think most people could do because I dedicate so much time to it. Some people, it's like, hey, I want to go to the gym. I want to lift weights to be able to build muscle, and I want to do endurance work so my heart feels strong so that I can be more effective in my work. It's like, all right, well, that's your movement model. That's your bubble that you operate around. So it can be applied at a human holistic level, or it could be applied at a singular movement. So for CrossFit, snatch, muscle up, handstand push-up, they could all be applied into that model.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think the characteristics, the importance of the characteristics or the hierarchy of them changes based on the movement. So if you have some examples of that, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I think it changes more so based on the goal. So this is it's my context in my head. I know not all coaches, even all TTT coaches operate the same way, but the first thing I do when I talk to someone is I try to get like a mental image in my head of what is their body capable of doing movement-wise and what do they want to do. So like,
can you take me as an example?
Yeah.
Or like maybe me and Mike through this? Because I think this would be really valuable for the people that are listening and watching. So like, obviously you know both of us, but for those that are watching, I've had left knee issues for a long time and then got in a car accident probably, I don't know, 8 weeks ago now, and it caused even more issues. So I have been basically like scaling back everything.
Yeah.
But pain is obviously holding me back, and then just like the ability to endure high volume workouts because of inflammation and other things, and relatively weak compared to someone like Mike, but more enduring than maybe someone like Mike. And then obviously you would be the opposite of that.
Yours would be a little bit more difficult to, I think, run through as an example because your goal wouldn't be as concrete, right? Like you have this goal of being able to continue to stay at a high level in CrossFit, continue to enjoy the process, continue to play golf, be healthy and play with your kids. So for you, that's more of like a process orientation that I think is just something you're gonna evolve. But let's just, if we use Mike as an example and say, I don't know if this is actually true, but let's say his goal was to be an elite CrossFitter again. Like he's gonna put all of his time and effort into making the games as a master's athlete in the next year and be in the top 10. I go through that process, and I know him because we've trained a lot and I've coached him. So you go through a process of saying like, all right, well, this dude can snatch 300 pounds without really training his snatch. He can clean and jerk 350 pounds without training his clean. He struggles on 20-minute AMRAPs and doing things that are really light loaded and high turnover movements and high cadence respiration. And that process would happen in a normal assessment. So I'd sit down, talk to him, like, what do you like doing in the sport? Give me some of your numbers. And you just get this, like, you look at all the data and you're like, all right, well, this athlete is clearly very intense. His endurance is relatively low. His variability is super high because he's obviously been successful in the sport of CrossFit. So he knows how to do that and knows how to accomplish the task for himself. He's done it for 10 years, so he's coached super well. So his virtuosity is pretty high. I probably don't need to be coaching him on like your setup, your hand position. Yeah. Like I might point little things out that, hey, you might want to make this a little bit more efficient. And then his freedom might need a little bit of work. He's a tighter, more stiff athlete. He needs a lot longer to like warm up his squat pattern than I would be.
So restricted.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, well, those are the two priorities for him. And then you basically whittle that down and you're like, all right, well, let's figure out then how to sequence that into your strength and energy system training so that it's synergistic with everything, so that overall, if he's trying to get more balance, they're like little dials on, I look at that little podcast thing, it has all those dials that you're ramping up. So like his intensity is ramped up, his endurance is low, his variability, virtuosity is up, and his freedom is low. It's like I'm going up and I'm trying to pull those dials up, knowing that they might bring these down a little bit, but overall he's gonna be a more well-rounded athlete.
I've always wished when we built an assessment process that we could like generate one of those graphics that shows up like a video game when you're choosing the character.
We should. You're a 99 in this and a 27.
Speed, agility, power, softness.
Your endurance, 3. Is this out of 100?
Yeah. You just put the cheat code in though and you can move it up to 99. That'd be awesome.
Oh, So then, I guess that segues into like, all right, what do you do then? You have all of that
tools?
stuff. You have tools then to change movement. The same way that you have tools like strength training itself is one of the tools to change movement. If somebody is, as an example, they're a yogi as their background, let's just say there's two things. There's freedom and then there's intensity. Their freedom is super high. They're super lax in their joints. They can get into every position. They can sit in the bottom of an overhead squat and be straight up and down from wrist to shoulder to hip, full dorsiflexion, no pain, super balanced, but no tension, and they can't load it. Freedom super high, intensity super low. So for them, strength training is the general tool that would guide them up. That doesn't work for people that are in the opposite boat.
Yeah, keep running with my examples. So like, what did we say? Endurance and freedom.
Yeah, so good ones
tools,
for you, like positional breathing would generally be good. If people can't endure in a position, they probably can't breathe well in a position because then you're like holding your breath, over bracing, pumping blood pressure. Like you're just getting so many extra fatigue signals just by like straining to just be in a position.
Whether that's like getting out of the bottom of a burpee, stepping up one leg, like flexing the hip, over tense in that position for 100 reps. it's just wasted energy.
Exactly. So whatever it is, you identify a position. Common ones would be hip flexion, which would come up in deep squatting, come up in toes to bar, shoulder extension or shoulder flexion and having arms overhead, which could be repeat shoulder to overhead, chest to bar, muscle up, any of those gymnastics. So then you can apply positional breathing to those, or you can apply like loaded stretching and isometrics. So generally people know how to stretch, and stretching is a good form of, developing better range of motion. But what I've found, if you're trying to translate it into being explosive in those ranges, it's not going to be helpful, because your brain will immediately tighten down if you're trying to be strong in an end range if you haven't trained strength in the end range. So generally I'll always pair loaded stretching and end range isometrics into one category. So you'll stretch a range, and then in that range you'll do heavy isometrics where you're trying to contract as hard as possible. So then you have that range, but now your brain and nervous system are training to also be strong in there. I've found that translates into better performance, to be able to have not just better freedom, but also better expression of that freedom to be intense in it.
Yeah, it keeps you safer, because then you have control of whatever that end range may be.
Yeah, something that I've actually used that for is lunging. So I've had a history of adductor strains when doing like loaded lunging, and overall just being in that split stance position is very uncomfortable for me. So first of all, if you've never done in-range isometrics like that, they're brutal.
Yeah,
like if you're truly like maximizing the contraction at in-range, like it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But I started to kind of gain more strength there, and my body became more comfortable contracting at that in-range, and like I just started having less problems, like whether it be like overhead lunging, whatever, going into that split position, it basically translated into like all types of lunging movements.
Yeah, and it's safer, it's more effective, and the thing that I've found for me, so I got back into CrossFit and I wanted to be good. Like I know that I'm not going to be an elite athlete. I know I probably won't even be the fittest coach in my organization. Like I knew that when I started the process, but I wasn't satisfied with where I was. And part of the problem was like, I can't do enough volume. Like I want to get better at muscle ups. I can't do 75 muscle ups a week when I started the process. But what I can do is figure out how all those positions that I need to be in, and I can build training volume of those patterns in a much lower, less stressful way to be able to start to build a structural base to be able to support it. 3 years later, now I can do it, and now I can actually play the sport and have fun without thinking about pain. But you just have to have a longer term approach to say like, all right, well, I can't train the way Rich Froning and Fraser and Noah and Travis and Will are training. I can't do that. But what can I do to build a base that I could get to the point that I'm closer to that? For me, that was the whole concept of movement training and how to apply that specifically to CrossFit. Different than the esoteric model of somebody like Ido Portal, because I'm not trying to be an acrobat, and I do still train those things just to be able to have that type of movement quality. But the way I'm thinking about it is more like combat. Maybe I want to get back into grappling or fighting or striking or MMA. So like my whole concept of movement is less like dance, fluidity, but I'm still thinking the same thing, like hand-eye coordination, spinal flexion, head motion, ability to change orientation and lean left, lean right. It's all the same type of stuff, but that didn't really necessarily apply to CrossFit. But if you take the tools, then you can apply them to CrossFit.
So for those that are interested in loaded stretching and isometrics or anything else we talk about, we have actually free playlists on YouTube that have all these. You did a great job of some of that. So you can literally click through those on the Training Think Tank YouTube. I just know that some people may hear loaded stretching and be like, well, what does that mean? So
trainingthinktank.com, or YouTube, Training Think Tank playlists. They're called movement archives. So I'll probably mess these up and not do them all off the top of my head, but loaded stretching, end range isometrics, locomotion and flow, positional breathing, ground-based movement. The typical strength training is in there. I'm assuming most people in CrossFit already understand how to strength train, but I still put it in there for like hinging, lunging, just like the basic movement patterns that you'd have to go through to get somebody to move better. Any that I'm missing that you can remember off the top of your head?
Yeah, those are the ones that I use the most.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
all of my clients, I use those all the time. And for the last 2 years, I've used them every single day when I'm sending programs.
Cool. So first video in all the playlists is an explanation of like what it is, where it came from, the inspiration, so that if somebody wants to do a little bit more of their own digging, they can find where I gained the information. And then the rest of the videos in the archive are all me doing examples of being in positions that I thought people would need or want to be able to be in. And you have to apply them to whatever your training goal is. Like a lot of times people will look at somebody doing like, Ido Portal doing an ostrich walk, and they're like, this is stupid. Like, why do I need to do that? I want to do thrusters and pull-ups. So it's like, all right, maybe that isn't good for you, or maybe if your back is blowing up all the time when you're doing repeat snatches at 75 pounds and like every single time you're going down, this might be an effective warm-up tool for you to be able to do 50 feet back and forth while you're breathing, just to condition your posterior chain and your lower back to go through single leg flexion and pulse up and down dynamically in a way that's not loaded with a barbell and that's not going to risk your back. It's just like a lower intensity warm-up variation of the same thing.
Yeah, an example I've heard you talk about a lot on yourself is a lot of your bounding issues.
Yeah.
How are you going to bridge the gap to get to the point where you can handle the contraction volume of bounding that you see in workouts when your feet just can't handle it? And doing just more box jumps on top of more box jumps and double unders wasn't working for you. It was actually breaking you down and regressing a little bit.
Yeah.
You talk about like going home and getting on soft grass and just playing with different ways to basically work on like single leg foot striking on the floor. And I think that that's important for someone who's not used to this train of thought or a change in their training. They have to be willing to explore different ways other than just volume.
Yeah. The model of, like, most people, they go into a gym and their fitness world is, like, if you have 24 hours a day, it's condensed into their 90-minute window, right? Like, the only time they're thinking about their body and fitness is they walk into a gym. It's like, all right, well, the environment plays a role in how your body operates. So the environment, if you're talking about a box, is a concrete floor with probably a half-inch rubber pad that's completely level. And so all of the work that you're doing is on that specific surface. The ground reaction forces are way higher. So it's like, all right, you're doing this, you're jumping onto a 24 or 20-inch box, which is a relatively high repeat plyometric.
Yeah.
It's not like a little bunny hop, like just for like sake of what type of forces your body have to absorb. It's pretty damn high.
Yeah.
And I was aware of that. So I'm sure just being aware of the thought made me like hyper conscious of it, like the overthinking situation, but also it was just hurting. And I could tell, like, all right, I'm finding compensations to get this done that are definitely not efficient. If I look at me versus somebody that could just jump down and bound, what's happening? And then it's like, all right, we'll go through the principles of plyometrics in general. If you want to just lower the ground reaction forces or be able to tolerate it with less force, like Kenyan runners, the anecdote is a lot of times they'll go to a marathon and they'll run on soft surfaces barefoot just to stay loose and stay fresh the day before to keep their run volume up but keep the impact on their body low.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, we'll take that same principle and apply it to my body. And I think for me, my fitness is not like 90 minutes in the gym and that's all that I'm thinking about. It's like, well, I got my body for the rest of my life. So pretty much anything that I do, even if I'm sitting down and typing, I'm thinking about like, well, what's this doing to my body and my posture long term? I'm not stressed about it. I'm not like, well, if I sit down like this for 2 hours, it's not going to ruin me. But if I sit like this for 10 hours every day for the next 10 years, it will impact my quality of life. So I'm just more hyper conscious of that. And I think people should be that way. And I think it also translates into anybody's individual goals getting better if they are thinking about, even in the back of your mind, just thinking about the fact that as a human body, your mind and your intellectual processes, your emotions, and then your body and your movement. And that's part of who you are for your entire life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of processes that are necessary to buy into a new style of training, or taking movement more seriously. And I think the first is that you have to believe it's going to work. Even before you actually go out and start trying them, like, you have to be convinced that it is going to work, even if you haven't tried it before.
Yeah.
And then next, as soon as you feel the result of that, that's when it really, like, the momentum starts to roll forward, which is like why most of us coaches here, I think all of us do it very similar, but the movement screen and the assessment, when we bring someone new on board, like, so much of the time is put into me reviewing someone's movement and then talking through all the movements they filmed talking through and giving just a ton of information on why this is important. And immediately right then, they're like, I didn't consider that. That makes so much sense. Now I know why you're having me roll around on the floor.
Yeah, it gives you a purpose for doing things that seem silly.
Yeah, it puts a connection to it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, most people in CrossFit probably picked a role model that's like lean, jacked, strong, looks the way they want to look and moves the way they want to move. And then they're like, well, I'm going to mimic them. They do a lot of CrossFit, so I'm going to do a lot of CrossFit. And you're like, well, you don't know all the stuff that they did with their body ahead of that period of time that they're handling CrossFit. Yep. And then there's a video on Instagram of Matt Frazier just doing a backflip and Tia's filming him and he got caught doing it. And I'm like, he's training his just movement quality and virtuosity by being who he is. He just does it. And you hear anecdotes of him jumping off roofs into water. And I'm like, yeah. And Froning, you guys went and hung out with him and you're like, yeah, he wakeboards and does backflips off the things.
He's good at everything.
Yeah, he's good at moving first. And then when applying that movement to a singular thing that he spends most of his training time doing, he's able to express that movement. So I think that's really the context for doing is you got to become your best mover, and doing that in whatever your goal is, I think just gives you the best leg up to be your best version of yourself.
Yeah, I want to kind of take this to performance aspects because that kind of ties back into the whole movement economy thing, right? We have our idols, right? I want to be Matt Frazier. Well, if you don't move like him, actual mobility, range of motion, have all the 5 things you talked about, most likely you probably shouldn't train like him either, right? You can't do all the volume and the intensity.
Yeah, those guys have a ton of freedom.
Yeah. Right, and so they have the ability to do that because he has the freedom and the endurance and the intensity and everything. When we're looking at that, I think the first step is where am I at? What do I need? Talk about me and Mike. Maybe it's me. I need to get out of pain first and figure out what I need to do with range of motion with my knee, and then have endurance, and then bring intensity or whatever it may be. But you have to go through that process first to be able to put on the weights and the capacity that maybe you want one day, maybe to look up to Frazier. And so when we're talking about all this, I think the end goal, if you want to be a high performer in the sport of CrossFit, has to be I need to move well and have better movement economy across the board. You got to start at the baseline of okay, how do I get there with all of these movements? Because if you can use less effort per rep, then obviously you're already at an advantage to everyone else in the sport. So I always say, and this is obviously not necessarily true, but as a broad statement, the top probably 10 or 15 guys are really close if you looked at all the physiological metrics that we can. What's the difference then? Obviously there's a psychological part. Frazier's just a killer. Noah gets after it. He performs on game day. But there's got to be something else. And part of that is if you watch them on game day, they move more efficiently than everyone else. They've figured out that virtuosity of when I do light snatches, hands are in. When I do heavy snatches, hands are out a little bit. When I'm doing fast chest to bars, I'm going really wide so it shortens the range of motion. All of those little things that I think we miss out on because we're always trying to go hard. So I want you to just kind of talk on that a little bit. I think that's important.
Yeah, and you could add to this as well, but also the individual differences I think need to be respected where you see how different they all move, but what's in common is that it is good movement. Yeah. But I think getting to a point where you can respect the ability to move in your own way. Yeah. You don't have to squat exactly like Noah, but you see how well he moves and it's very efficient.
Yeah, it's one of the principles of movement training that I have in the course that I laid out, which is in the classroom, and people can look at and try out. And if they like all the stuff that's on YouTube, that's where it kind of goes in depth and it's actually a full course. Individual differences are just always going to be the case. Shaq as a basketball player, if you started training him and he was like, I want to get good at CrossFit, and then you have somebody don't please, but you have somebody like that in that body, and then you have somebody that's, let's use Ido Portal, who's a very small human being with full range of motion who has a ton of literacy of movement. The training protocols and volume tolerance and amount of work that they're going to be doing and the stress that is on their systems is going to be so much different. Now that's 2 polar opposite examples.
You're not kidding.
Which is like, that's why I chose them, is because that makes sense.
That would be an awesome celebrity death.
A death match, like a fight, or a cross.
You don't remember that show?
No.
Oh, Chris does.
So those two people, if they need to have a training program, a movement training program written for them, you have to respect those individual differences. The amount of bounding somebody that's 7'2" and 300 plus pounds can tolerate.
Big dude.
Yeah, it's going to be so much less than 5'5", 140. Like, those are just two different systems operating in their environment. So that'd be number one. To answer your part. Your part was
yeah,
what?
I confused it.
I
muddied the water.
No, I think that's actually what I was trying to get to, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that people, because a lot of times, again, people don't care about movement unless they get in pain. Well, the other side of the coin is maybe we should just care about movement if we want to be a high performer in the sport, right? Like, outside of the holistic approach, if you want to be the best in the sport now, like, there are so many people that have the same capacity, you got to find an edge somewhere. So to me, one of those things is being a better mover and learning how to move efficiently across the board. And it goes to that, you have to respect the individual differences people have. Noah and I squat differently, but we probably squat at a similar cadence if we were doing Murph.
Yeah.
But it's just like, well, who can be more efficient? Noah's going to be way more efficient than someone with a bum knee. So it's like figuring out, how do I get more efficient for the endurance aspect of the sport for me, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think just in general, I don't really want to sell people on the concept. I'm sold on the concept because it's worked for me, it's allowed me to accomplish things, but it can be applied even outside of physical training. So I think about it too. People want to, Kyle put up a series in the classroom about managing spreadsheets and helping people get better at remote coaching, essentially, and writing program designs. And one of the things that I always think about is people like, man, it takes me forever to write a program. I'm like, well, probably some of that's inhibited by your typing speed, which is like, to me, in my head, I'm thinking like, well, that's movement intensity, like your ability to control the dexterity of your fingers and actually be able to type and know the shortcuts of everything. So like, even outside of the physical realm, in the mental realm, in the professional realm, I think your ability to be efficient with the way that your body interacts with your environment in your workspace is important. A lot of people work on computers. Once you start going down the rabbit hole of thinking about, oh, this is my body, I'm kind of in control of it, I have some control of it, not as much as I want, you can start to make it better with its ability to interact with all the stuff around you. And that efficiency leads to you being able to do more work, more efficient work, more meaning, more success, and all the stuff that comes with just getting better at stuff.
An example that comes to mind with that, something that would limit someone's movement progress, is being in an environment that's not supporting doing those types of things.
Yeah.
And I think that it could be out of self-consciousness, whether you're in an environment that, like, if you are rolling around on the floor, you've got your breathing work and all that, people are gonna look at you like, what the hell is this guy doing?
Yeah.
And you're self-conscious about that. Like, I've had clients say that, like, you know, they like train maybe like at a Globo type gym and they're like, I just feel weird doing this kind of stuff here, like setting up a camera and doing that. And like, it doesn't matter how many times I keep writing it, like if they're not in the mindset of being willing to work on something like that, where they're, you know, like self-consciousness is in the way of that, like it's basically going to just stop progress, like long term. It's not going to work.
Well, principle number 2 would be cultivate a mind state of progress. And I think, honestly, you just got to get to the point that you care more about your own training progress or whatever life progress more than you care about anybody else's opinion of what you're doing. And I know, like, tying it back to the golf example, Brandon will probably laugh at me. I've been obsessed with trying to be able to make sure that I'm more balanced, because golf, when I got into it when I was young, I was super obsessive. I already had a whole side that was previously injured, and every single time I started to get into golf and wanted to play 18 rounds, it would kill my back, it would negatively impact my training. So I was like, you know what? This has to be partially the fact that I'm swinging, 1,000 times a week. I'm rotating in one direction and I'm rotating in the opposite direction 0. So I'm gonna learn how to golf lefty. So I learned how to, you go to the driving range, you hit balls and you're like, all right, I'm pretty confident, I'm not gonna be self-conscious about this. And now I'm gonna switch to the other side and I'm gonna be barely able to hit the ball. It's gonna be duffing out in front of me. I'm shanking it to one side. People
that's what it feels like when I play golf.
Yeah.
All the time, right?
Yeah. And even getting, I went and got a lesson and some guy looked in my bag, and he's like, why do you have a left-handed 7-iron? And I was like, well, I wanted to learn how to swing left-handed, like for more structural balance. And I was like, just left it simple. I didn't want to have a 1-hour conversation.
Well, movement virtuosity.
Let me explain myself. And he was like, the golf swing's not hard enough for you in one direction. And I'm like,
okay.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I don't give a shit because I'm more concerned about me not having back pain doing the things that I want to do. So this is part of my process for trying to progress myself as a human. And I think I just got to the point now where I just don't give a fuck about what people think. If I'm doing something that looks stupid, I'm more concerned about, I have this end goal of the things I want to accomplish before I die. I'm going to do everything with my time right now to progress. I think that's a good principle. It's in my movement course, but I guess it's really just a life principle.
Yeah, I think you have to stay focused on the goals that you have. And if you are, then you don't care.
Yeah.
But I think it's very easy. You talk about the golf thing. Like, I get embarrassed when I hit a bad shot and you got a bunch of people. But it's the same thing. I have people all the time, and I've done this myself. I'm going for, let's say, a max or 1RM. Yeah. I'm worried about missing and thinking, what will other people think if I miss this lift or if it looks sloppy? And then it's like everything's focused on my miss as opposed to me saying, I'm doing this so that I can get better.
Yeah, and honestly, most of the time, no one gives a shit.
Right.
Like, they don't care. They've been there, they've done it, they've been embarrassed themselves, they're insecure. If they're gonna make fun of you about it, they're probably insecure and haven't done it themselves. So it's like, don't worry about that, worry about progress.
And look, even if they did care, if you're so focused on your own progress, then you're okay with it.
Yeah, just white noise.
I'm going to continue to get better at this.
Yeah. Back pain and protecting the spine would be a third principle. I guess that ties into, for me, that was a principle because I had a ton of my own experience with it in general. It was super painful, and it made life itself unenjoyable. When you can't bend over, you can't walk without pain, you can't go to the toilet without hurting, like all of that stuff is like, man, I'm in my 20s and like I can't move, and I consider myself an athlete and somebody who should be giving people fitness advice. The spine is like I think the Eastern adage is like you're only as old as your spine. It's super important, and I think something like CrossFit for a lot of people can be very detrimental to your spine because it's encouraging you to go through flexion, extension, overhead, being overhead and walking on your hands while you're basically hyperventilating and not really bracing your spine and doing thousands and thousands and thousands of reps. Now, it doesn't mean that doing CrossFit is bad for your spine. It means that you need to be hyper aware of, how do I protect it? How do I make myself safe? How do I improve my balance, my bracing? Like I'm doing right now, even with all the back issues I've had in the past, way more pulling, handstand walking, jumping, running, GHD, toes to bar volume than I've ever done in a pain-free environment in my spine. But some of that was just making sure that I've protected it over time and I listened to those signals. So I think people need to understand how to brace, what loading parameters they need to make sure that they have their brace fully set on, how to improve their hip flexion, just like all the positions that are required to be better at that.
Yeah, and I think the argument too, it just comes down to like why the risk with those movements? Because obviously like you're putting your spine under a lot of different positions with being under fatigue and like a lot of recipes for disaster there. So like why even do that if it's just training? And I think it comes down to because it's something you enjoy to do. And I think golf could be another example. It's like putting a ton of rotational stress on the spine, but people love to play golf, so they're willing to deal with that. It just comes to a point where if you want to continue to do that and enjoy it, then you have to start making the hips more mobile, you have to start getting more rotation of the upper back. I mean, it's just one of those things that you have to consider that there is always risk with any sport or activity that you want to do. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And most of the times, it's fun.
Yeah, I like that concept. Is just like there's no risk-free way to live. Life is gonna get all of us. We're all gonna get older and we're all gonna deteriorate a little bit, or decay is my word that you guys made fun of me about.
You said that about in the Masters video one time. This is a Masters video. You're decaying athlete.
The body's breaking down and basically in the dirt already. But this is gonna happen to all of us.
That's what we should call our Masters program.
The decay. The decay
slow
prevention.
decay.
Yeah. Slow the decay.
The decay and the restful.
Yeah. So you have this, like, you know that it's going to happen, whether you're, okay, I sit down all the time and I, do a bunch of computer editing work. It's like, you're probably going to have some back issues and hip tightness from that. You're you drive tractor trailers and you're in the car 9 hours a day. You're going to probably have some issues. If you play golf, you're going to have single side rotational side bending compression issues on one side and not the other side. You do jiu-jitsu, you're going to have hyperlax ankles and hyperlax hips. You do running, you're probably going to have some repetitive overloading issues. It's like any discipline you choose is going to have its own subset of stuff that is going to probably break down. The key is to find a strategy to limit that, to allow you to express as high as possible and enjoy it in as pain-free of a process as you possibly can. And I think a lot of that is about being mindful and deliberate. And when you're a young athlete, I think that's actually one of the problems with giving influencers, who are almost all like young, super gifted people that are good at taking pictures. Yeah. You give them the power to influence the market, and I'm like, hold on, wait, but you don't have any experience with like what all of the people you're influencing are dealing with, which is like pain, your ability to deal with volume, breaking down. Like if you don't have that and you don't have a mindful process to cultivate, you're just sharing what you've done that has given you success, but you're already just successful in spite of what you're doing because you're just in that time of life where like everything's working. But that's not how most people are dealing with their bodies. Most people are in a struggle to find their process.
Yeah. The one thing I would say too is like with every risk comes a reward too.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure that you're mitigating that risk as best you can to clean up whatever it is that's holding you back.
Yeah. Last principle was set the ANS for the task, and that's really just like
Set the anus?
Set the anus. Yeah, set your anus for your task. No, your ANS is your autonomic nervous system. It's basically just a concept for understanding that like the headspace, the breathing parameters, the bracing that you're going to be in if you're trying to do a 1 rep max deadlift versus attain like, let's say, maximal end range in a forward fold and a forward fold pike stretch. They're different. You need to breathe differently. You need to have different levels of adrenaline. You need different levels of warming up. You need different breathing. And all of that stuff is necessary to match up if you're doing movement work. Now, it could even be like if you're doing a Metcon that has heavy squat cleans and burpee box jumps, like the forces and the demand that's going to go through your body is way different, which means the level of excitement and arousal you need is going to be way higher than you're doing something like Murph that's an hour long, that's very low loaded contractions that just over and over and over again for 40 plus minutes of time.
Yep.
Those are two totally different things. So I say set the ANS, set the anus for the task. No one's going to forget that now.
I mean, it's kind of true though if you're
What are you
bracing.
doing right now? I'm setting my anus.
My anus is now set for the task. But if you have that done appropriately, I think it translates into, again, less injuries. It helps, like if you're deadlifting with like, you know, as little tension as possible and no brace, and you're trying to deadlift 315 for reps under fatigue after you've already done 100 reps, you're probably not in the smartest position to brace your spine. If you're doing heavy muscle ups and you're breathing heavy and you're just like totally getting overextended, rib cage and pelvis are blowing open, like you're probably gonna get some like hypercompression in your lower back. So the movement headspace needs to be matched up to whatever you're asking your body to do.
Yeah, I think that kind of like is combined a little bit with cultivating mindset for progress as well. Just going back to like, you know, the opposite of bracing for like a heavy clean, if you're trying to do a controlled shoulder joint rotation, you can't be in the mindset of like, all right, I just got to get this done quickly, or this looks really stupid. Like you have to basically go do some breathing, kind of set the tone before you go into that kind of work. And, you know, lower the self-consciousness, whatever you want to call it, so you can actually think and be. I always tell people, I'm like, think about it as if your brain is in your shoulder and you're trying to feel every little bit of range of motion when you do this. Don't just go and do shoulder swings.
Yeah, joint rotations we didn't talk about, movement tools, but they're also in the playlist.
Yeah.
So outside
of the playlist that's free on YouTube, we also have a full movement course that you did, which is like one of my favorite courses I think that we've ever done on trainingthinktank.com/classroom. Am I right by saying that? That's the correct URL.
Yep. You could get 7 days for free if you could get through the whole thing in that period of time.
Good luck.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's actually really cool because you put, I mean, there's hours of
If they want to
content.
get the trial, they got to go to /classroom trial.
Classroom trial.
We'll say that out loud. I don't know if they can hear me.
If you want to get the 7-day free trial, you have to go to trainingthinktank.com/classroom trial.
Say it 2 more times.
If you want to get the free,
He was going to do it. We just listened to Chris. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. All right, well, that's it. That's movement in a bottle from Training Think Tank. I don't know why I said bottle. It just came out. I can't take it back.
The bottle, baby.
Nerds. All right.
Cool.